Is it done yet? When will it be done? When will I stop investing? When will I finish the program?
Well, hold on. Why are they even asking that? Shouldn't they know that?
Your platform is not going to differentiate you. It's your product. It's the product and the way you service your customer, the way you reach out and how the brand touches the customer. That's your differentiation. It was a very interesting conversation with my CEO, and it was hundreds of thousands of pounds. This was proper bottom line impact. I mean, I got a proper drilling, and then he said, "You are still my CTO." Most of the best innovation comes from people saying, "I don't want to do this anymore."
And you're having everything thrown at you from BAU, continuous improvement, all the words, innovation, projects, transformations, everything coming at you.
If you can get people to focus on the outcome, it stops them saying, "I can't deliver because you didn't give me my tech thing."
Us delivering together for the outcome rather than me delivering for you.
Frustrations of a CTO.
Welcome to the next episode of Frustrations of a CTO. Today I'm joined by John Allen, whose experience from a technology perspective is almost unrivaled as CTO of ASOS, Missguided, and also Nobody's Child. John, do you want to take a moment to introduce yourself to the audience?
Thanks, Simon. So I'm John Allen. I've been a CTO, a long-standing CTO. I've been in lots of different roles, had lots of different commercial roles as well as CTO. Started at IBM, spent time at ASOS, spent time at Missguided, was a chief exec at Nobody's Child, latterly in the style and a little bit of work in fashion, a little bit of work in buildings and construction, a little bit of work in travel and transportation and tech platforms as well.
You have obviously got a very in-depth experience from a technology perspective, played the CTO role or the CIO role many a time. Quick question, what's the difference, off-piste, what's the difference between a CTO and a CIO, do you think? How would you categorize that if someone said to you, what's the difference between CIO and CTO, John?
It's funny you mention that because somebody asked me this the other day, and earlier in my career, I always saw the CTO role as the lesser to the CIO. CIO would be the owner of everything, the program role, the change role, and CTO would own digital product delivery, engineering function, etc. And of course, those things have really converged a lot. And actually now, I actually ended up Googling this as part of a bit of an experiment, and it tends to talk now about the CIO being, a lesser role to the CTO. And in fact, because digital product and digital experience has become so powerful, that the CIO role, the sort of owner and deliverer of program and change and technology, which is probably how I'd probably best describe a CIO versus a CTO who is a builder and owner of digital product. And I think that's probably a reasonable way to describe the two roles, but it's really difficult now to differentiate them. And in fact, so many organisations, big PLCs now have shifted from the CIO role towards CTO role. Yeah. And the role that used to be encompassed in CIO, which was very much about governance and program and management and change management, that's just part of the CTO role now anyway.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And we discussed it on a previous episode, hence I wanted to ask you the same question, and we came to a similar conclusion that the roles have changed massively over the years. Yes. And I again, this is my experience, and people listening and watching will have different views, but my experience is that CIO is often more internally facing now. A CTO is more externally facing, or it's a little bit more external facing, with a strategic view and also trying to deliver on innovation and sort of platform product selection process. But I think we also came to the conclusion that it's also down to the organization. What's right for the organization? What's the organization structure trying to achieve? Different personalities, roles. And therefore, there's probably no right answer to this. It's just what's your experience.
Yeah, and I think where there's a big, certainly in large organisations that are very governance-led, finance, some of the travel and transportation organisations, anything that's very highly regulated, there tends to be a CIO role to manage that sort of regulation side of things. And they often have a CTO role as well to deliver the product. Where those two things come together, the CTO in that case is very governance and policy focused,
Yeah,
and perhaps more so than you would find in, say, retail, which is where you and I have spent a lot of time.
It's a good point, isn't it? As well, not only does it change depending on the organisation, but also on the industry as well, and the needs of the industry. So I think that's a really valid point. Yeah. Okay, so frustrations of a CTO, that's what the video series is about. So we should probably talk about some of those frustrations. As I said, you've got a huge amount of experience in this role. Do you want to kick it off? What's one of your key frustrations that you've experienced during your lifetime as a CTO?
Yeah, I mean, there are hundreds, but I think one of the biggest has got to be, when is it done? When is it, is it done yet? When will it be done? When will I stop investing? When will I finish the program, project, whatever? And that concept that the thing you're delivering is a fixed thing in time, that's probably one of my biggest frustrations, because getting... And there are parts of technology delivery that are like that. So, I use a pace-layered model quite a lot, and there are chunky things that you can sort of park for a while, but generally speaking, it's an operational element of your business, and you don't stop delivering the operational elements of a business. And actually, getting boards or all parts of boards familiar with that kind of process, that thought process is it's getting better than it used to be, but it's still prevalent now. CFOs are better at it than they used to be, but lots of board members still want to know when it's stopped, when it's done, when it's delivered.
Okay, and do you think that if people are asking those questions that actually maybe there's something wrong with the communication or the governance process? Because the fact that they're asking the question for me is like, oh, hold on, why are they even asking that? Shouldn't they know that type of thing? Do you think there's often that's because something's missing there?
Yes, and that sort of leans into another frustration of being a CTO is that you're there not just to deliver digital product and platforms and policies that go with them and business change, but you're also there to educate and lead forwards. Specifically, if you're a operating board or exec board level, you're there to tutor and nurture those additional digital skills in your peers and colleagues on the board. And that, it is your responsibility. You are accountable for making sure that the right communication is happening and people on your peers on the board understand. They're also accountable for, and responsible for taking on those skills and leadership qualities themselves as well. And that also is frustrating because sometimes they are locked up in their own specific world. It wouldn't be the first time that a CRO or a sales director or an operations director had been really focused on the right thing, which is customers and revenue and acquisition, etc. And they're lost in that and not thinking about how the technology can help them change. And as a result, they expect you to sort of do it to them, but then get frustrated because you are doing it to them as well. That's sort of that. So I think that responsibility and that just lean into that other big frustration, I guess, is that you are there not just to do your job, but actually help others do theirs as well.
I like that. Yes, you're there to help them do their role, and potentially in some places actually do some of their role for them. But go back to that board piece as well. Influencing at a board level, massive part of being that senior leadership in technology. Sometimes easier than others, and it all depends on that. Suddenly, when you realise everybody's unique as an individual, if you like, everybody has their quirks, qualms, requirements, demands, expectations. Everyone's very different, aren't they? And so you have to influence differently across those different board members. Is that an easy process, or sometimes quite frustrating with some personalities?
I'm always minded to. There's a thing about management in general, which I'm always minded to remember, which is when people say, "How do you manage people? What's the best way to manage a person?" And the answer is, it depends.
Yeah,
and it depends because it's all about the person you're talking to, their specific needs and requirements, and their personality. Some people are good at taking. They want to take. They want to take positive criticism. They want to be coached. They want to be nurtured. Some people don't, and so the first part of any CTO relationship is understanding who you're working with and for, what they're giving you and what you're giving them, and how that relationship is going to work. And then you can start to say, well, what do you need from me and what do I need from you? Because of course it works both ways. You are there to nurture and support them, but they are also there to do that to you too. But yeah, that idea of you really do need to get past the egos, get past the frustrations. They will have their frustrations, and often it's about lack of delivery, or they see things as slow or not moving, or that all the things they thought they'd asked for never got delivered. All of that stuff, you've got to get rid of all of that and get down to the real individual and what they're actually after.
Yeah. So that's a really good point, right? And I think that's probably something quite common in the industry as well, isn't it? That, it's technology, it's with IT, they're not delivering, technology's not delivering again, it's another technology project. How do you overcome that perception that some organizations just have inherently, as you walk into an organization and they're like, it's another technology, project, it's stuck, etc. How do you overcome that? How do you change that culture, that perception of technology and ability to deliver?
As I said before, it depends, but it always comes down to getting the right people involved in the right programs with the right responsibilities and accountabilities. In other words, it's about building multifunctional teams that are going to deliver things together. And when you do that, that helps because it's not about me delivering something to you. It's about us working together to deliver something to the customer or to the shareholders or whatever. It's the outcome is important.
How do you drive that then? How do you get them to understand that it's us delivering together for the outcome rather than me delivering for you
and
somebody in the business?
I think the best way of doing that is by bringing those people together, focusing not on. It's very, very easy to say what I need from you is X, and actually the question is always why. So, and if you can do that sort of why do you need that? What is it that you're going to get from this? Actually, what you end up with is you end up getting the outcome, and if you can get people to focus on the outcomes, and this doesn't matter whether you're at exec board level or whether you're talking to the operational teams. If you can get people to focus on the outcome, it stops them saying, I can't deliver because you didn't give me my tech thing. But what I can do is, because you've got skills in your team, or you've got a platform that we haven't fully utilized yet, or I've got a platform I could be using, but I don't have the skills to use it. We can work together to actually create an outcome which might not be the ultimate thing that I want, but it's getting us towards where we need to be. And that sort of working together, getting focused on collectively what the end outcome is, it does draw people together in a way that's much more positive than I can't deliver because you didn't give me the thing I wanted. And that creates that sort of. There are lots of organisations that on the surface look like they're working as multifunctional teams, but actually under the covers, what they're really doing is saying, I'll deliver my number when you deliver me my platform, or I can do international when we've got 2 languages. And we all know that actually if we get together and think about these things and say, what is the thing that we're trying to achieve? What's the outcome? We typically get to those together, even without new technology being in place. But you do need the technology to keep improving. And that also then helps with things like prioritisation. It helps with that frustration about, I didn't get everything I wanted, but ultimately then you get to everything you needed. That's when you start to build that relationship in a better.
And drawing on that as well, I think that's another frustration from a technology perspective. Is I talked about this before. As a CTO, you're in the center of the business. You're having conversations with every corner of the business, and everyone's demanding things from you. And I think that's very unique. I don't think there are any. Challenge me on this if you can. I don't think there's any other departments in businesses that have those such strong demands from every other department in the business, and has that department at the focal point of it. I think technology is an obvious example of that, and then that becomes a very challenging place, because it's always, where's my project? Why can't I do this? Or technology is not delivering. And you're having everything thrown at you from BAU, continuous improvement, all the words, innovation, projects, transformations, everything coming at you. How do you handle that? How do you help to manage those expectations outwards around the art of the possible, the capacity within the team, and whether you should be delivering on their projects? How do you manage that demand at scale?
Good question.
Comes back to priorities, right? As you mentioned. So how do you get everybody aligned on the priorities? I suppose another way to phrase the question.
I think there's a couple of elements to this. The first is you and I have both been in a similar position where we've worked for different sized organisations with broadly the same requirements, but with totally different budgets.
Yes.
Right? So it teaches you that fundamentally the priorities remain pretty similar. You still have to acquire customers, you've got to keep them happy, you've got to take them money, you've got to service them with the product, you've got to show them the right product. All those normal things need to happen. And it doesn't matter whether you're running a £10 billion business or a £1 million business. Those things have fundamentally got to happen. So from a priorities point of view, it's about sort of almost depth. It's about how deep do you go, and it's obviously the impact of a change on £10 billion business is going to be much greater. But you still fundamentally need to do the basics well. So I think so when we think about priorities, we tend to look at quite often the differentiators get raised first. Mm-hmm. But if you're not doing the basics, it's very difficult to get to the differentiators. So one of the things I've always done is try to make sure that everybody understands where we are with the basics, and so if you haven't got the basics done yet, and it's back to that thing about you might not get everything you want, but we will give you everything you need. Mm-hmm. And so if you can focus on those first, then at least you get people in the right place. And again, it's sort of trying to focus on the outcomes. We want to grow the business, and I want this feature. Actually, the first thing we need is a website that works 24 hours a day. Or great example from a long distant past is, we've gone international, but the website doesn't work at night. Okay, that might be a little problem. So let's just fix that one thing. We don't need to do international languages because the website doesn't work overnight, and you're trying to trade in a different.
Or it doesn't work in the Southern Hemisphere.
Absolutely,
we have a problem.
Yeah. So and people were focused on language when so that was it was getting the basics right first. So that's the first thing. I think the other side of that sort of getting everybody in the right sort of place in terms of expectation is trying to make sure that we've talked just briefly just then about multifunctional teams and getting together, and the more multifunction you are, the more likely you are to have a focus on outcomes because you're working together, and you're also more likely to cross-pollinate in terms of skills and resources. And as you grow as an organisation, you tend to bring in new executive leadership and new senior leadership into the organisation. And the irony is that tends to break that model. Mm-hmm. You tend to have a monofunctional board sitting above multifunctional teams. And what you've got to do is make sure that you don't, as you grow the organisation, you don't break that model of multifunctionalism that you've actually created as a sort of in your early stage, and then spend months or years trying to recreate it somewhere in the future after you've created a sort of stovepipe business based on a monofunctional board. So that who you bring in and how they think in the organisation, and then nurturing how they think, again, is really important in making sure that you can then work with them to prioritise and make sure that they're focused on the right things, because then they're not focused on marketing, they're focused on customer acquisition. And customer acquisition is a blend of lots of different things, including marketing. So your marketing lead then is thinking more about the whole picture, and it's happier then to think about the global priorities rather than specifically their own.
And I think that for me is my key experience of being in that position, and everybody's piling on the work. It is exactly that. It's that global priorities. It's about getting it all out in front of in one place that everybody can see and everybody's aware of it. And again, we talked on this in a previous episode, that sharing your problems as a CTO, or sharing your workload, or sharing the ask, that's okay, right? It's acceptable. It's not a sign of weakness. Actually, it's a sign of strength that you can say, well, okay, this is everything that you're asking me to deliver from a global perspective. I said before, you either give me more budget to deliver this, or which you're probably not going to do, or you need to prioritize, and we need to have a discussion on it. And therefore, you don't internalize all of that pressure, do you, as a CTO? Because otherwise, you'll just say, "Yeah, I've got to deliver that. I've got to find a way to deliver this and that," and it becomes really hard. But actually, just sharing the problem, but sharing the challenge, should we say? I think is a strength.
Yeah, and that if you can build a visible model, and I think visible is a really powerful word, because the more visible it is, the more it is understood. If you can build a visible model that demonstrates the things you're working on and where they are, and again, focusing on the basics first and then moving towards differentiation. If you do that, when new things come in, which are super urgent, super important, possibly basics that need to be done as well, you can ask the question, what do we stop doing in order to make this happen? You and I have both worked in very big organizations with almost unlimited budgets. That period when we first met, we were throwing things at things to make them happen. And I went into an organization that was almost the same size with 1/8 of the budget in the year that followed. And we did the same things again. You just had to take a different approach. But every time something came in that needed to challenge that, we visibly put that in front of the stakeholders and said, great, this is fantastic. We can do this. Who is prepared to drop what? And it's not my choice. It's our choice. And sometimes the answer is actually don't change anything, carry on. We'll find a place for that later. Or actually, do you know what? We can stop doing X, but we're all happy that that's the case.
In your career as a CTO, I think you were telling me offline that you made a relatively large mistake, let's say, that costs one of the businesses a relatively large amount of money as well.
Yeah.
Do you want to elaborate a bit more on that without naming names and just talk us through that experience, but also, more importantly, what did you learn from it, and what lessons did you take away? How did you improve yourself going forward?
I think it's probably worth saying that I've made a lot of mistakes. I think we all have, right? Yeah. So, but this was a particularly large. It was financially, it was a large error. And so basically, what happened was we had put in a new order management system. We had the whole process had taken about 9 or 10 months, when the expectation was it might take up to 3 years. We'd done it really quickly, and we'd done it quickly because the business needed to continue to grow really fast. And we were at the time taking, anything up to a couple of 100,000 orders a day. So things were moving, really quickly. And the project had been a really phenomenal success. We'd identified loads of new stock that we didn't know about. We got visibility on orders and process and everything else, and supply chain. So the whole thing was really, really good. We were in a good place. And we'd spotted that order profitability was down slightly. And in fact, it came about because between, I think, myself and the chief commercial officer, we spotted that there were a number of orders that had basically were not as profitable as we thought. Anyway, to be specific, in e-commerce, if you short an order, you obviously cancel that line in the order, and you refund the line that's the money that's been taken, and then you ship the rest of the order. Obviously, if the order has only one item in it and you short that order, you would refund the postage as well. And it turned out that every time we shorted an order, and most of our orders were many lines, when you shorted an order, we were refunding all of the postage, regardless of whether it was one line order or not.
Wow.
So by the time we spotted this, it had been going on for about 4-ish months, maybe 5 months. And it was hundreds of thousands of pounds. This was proper bottom line impact. And clearly it was a big issue. So first eventually we resolved it and fixed the problem. It was actually a bug on the front end, but actually a configuration on the back end. But the thing that we learned from this, and then we used it as an opportunity to go and look, is we realized the business was so focused on growth and so focused on customer acquisition that we were not really looking at where the potential errors were in the business. And that included things like customer satisfaction. So, if you were shorting an order, we were not following up with anything. So, what did we learn from this? The first thing we learned is you do need to be more diligent in some of your testing, obviously. But we also learned that actually there's, in most organizations, part of doing the basics right is understanding what the organization is doing. And if you're running a high volume business, you need to know where your exceptions are. And so exception management shouldn't be a thing you do at the end of the process. It should be part of the everyday process. So we ended up doing a whole load of work then to look at specifically where you would find both opportunities, errors, profit issues within the organisation. And actually that gave us a whole range of new priorities, which were much more specific about driving both satisfaction and profit than if we just focused on, can we drive some more top line? It was a very interesting conversation with my CEO, it has to be said at the time.
I was going to say, it must have been a tough one.
He said to me, I got a proper drilling, and then he said, you are still my CTO,
right,
but just don't do it again,
right, yeah,
and tell me why it won't happen again. And that was when we got to the sort of, we built this sort of it was a set of reports to start with, but then a process to look at all these errors in the business. And that we got a whole commercial finance team involved in that, and they were really then diving into opportunities, which was a fantastic use of their time as well, and got them really digitally focused.
It's amazing. It's amazing how the business learned from that, put those learnings into practice, and it's amazing you kept your role.
Yes. Yeah, I think, and the other, the reality is that the platform we deployed was helping the business grow, right? Yeah. So
they could see it was a genuine mistake. It's an error. There's lots of other positives going on.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The business is moving at speed. It's growing so fast. It's there's a kind of it's not great. Everyone appreciates that, but there's an acceptance to it. Let's learn from it and keep on the trajectory that we're on. Right?
Absolutely. In the same organisation, we did a checkout replacement, and about 6 weeks into the work, we decided that actually what we were doing wasn't right. And we went back and said, we're going to take another 6 weeks to do this. And, the delay was seen as really acute. But because of what we did, instead of it taking, 6 to 12 months to pay back, it paid back in days. Right, yeah. So again, those sorts of where you've sort of made an error and you correct yourself, and you do it openly and you do it in an accountable way. We've made an error of judgment. The thing that we chose to do is not the right thing to do. If we go this direction, it's going to make a difference, as long as there's some degree of evidence and support to do that. The best organisations to work in are the ones when you can make quite big mistakes and you are openly accountable for them, and people understand what you've done, but they can also see why moving on is the right thing to do. And I think those sorts of organisations you genuinely feel like you can hold your hand up and say, this was wrong, I messed up, but I've got it. I know what's right now, and we can all learn from this, because actually it's the fact that we all didn't spot that, what was a very big error, hadn't been spotted. There were a whole range of people who theoretically should have seen that, but actually nobody was, no one was looking for it.
I'm always of the opinion that life is life, mistakes will happen, and we're all human, right? Yeah. It's just if that mistake happens again and again and again, then there's a conversation to be had, right?
Yes, so absolutely.
There's a common theme to it, then there's probably a conversation we need to have. But otherwise, let's move on, learn from it, as you say, and let's move on. And I also think that, unfortunately, I don't know, from my experience, maybe you've got a different experience, but those cultures those wonderful cultures that you're mentioning that are accepting and allow mistakes to happen and learn from mistakes, or allow ASOS particularly was a good example of, they had a very clear strategy and you were allowed to execute within that strategy. You could almost do whatever you wanted, as long as it aligned to the strategy and people would challenge you on whether what you wanted to do was aligned to the strategy or not. So it was great because you were challenged by your peers as well, and everybody's aligned. But those cultures, they're quite few and far between.
They are, and there is a direct relationship between outcome-focused cultures and output, product, feature-focused cultures. And feature-focused cultures are where, I've worked in a number of organisations where the stakeholders have said, this is what I want, deliver that to me. And when it gets delivered, it absolutely meets the brief, but fundamentally it's not what they needed. And then where do they go with that? Well, they can either be accountable for giving you the wrong brief in the first place, or they can point the finger. And it's unfortunately the way those cultures tend to work is they tend to say, what I really wanted was, or what I needed was, and the challenge with that is it's still focused on, you told me what you wanted and I gave you what you said you wanted, and now you're saying it's not what I need. That's because you're still focused on the product or the feature, not on the outcome. And that's why that's why earlier in the conversation we were talking about outcomes. That's why outcomes focused. If you can get everyone behind don't worry about how we're going to deliver this. The ASOS way, as you've just described, is fantastic. I'm going to give you a brief that says, I want more throughput through our checkout. I want customers to find product more easily on the site. I want them to transact more. I want higher conversion rates. But I'm not going to tell you how to do it, because actually you don't even know how to do it yet. As long as you meet those criteria, then that should be enough. And I think the companies that get too focused on specifically what tend also to be the same companies that are a little bit less tolerant of failure.
Coming back to what I need, and I need this, and these are my requirements. So we're seeing a shift from a Feast Fabric perspective when we're working with different CTOs. We're seeing a shift in the CTO culture, and actually the business more so, less so even the CTO culture, more from the business perspective, that they will accept a lesser deliverable, let's say, or a lesser match to their needs if they get the speed of delivery, if that makes sense. So it seems that people are much more willing to go, do you know what, I'll take that platform, it'll solve 85% of my needs, and I'll come back to those 10 or 15%. There are less, I'm finding there's less people sort of go, no, I've got to have the 100%, it's that or nothing, because people just want to move faster, get on with it, get onto platforms, leverage the benefit, measure the benefits, and then maybe reinvest that extra benefits into that last 10 or 15%. What's your view and experience of that?
A lot of organisations used to think that their trading platform, their digital interface, was the same as their product, right? And it is a digital product, and and it does need to be managed as such in terms of, it's ongoing, it needs continuous evolution, it needs to be, etc. But it's not a differentiation. If you have a great, shoe or scarf or handbag product and you're entering the market, your platform is not going to differentiate you. It's your product. It's the product and the way you service your customer, the way you reach out and how the brand touches the customer. That's your differentiation. And there's very little in the trading platforms and e-commerce in particular. There's very little in those platforms that will differentiate you. It's going to be the content, it's going to be the product, it's going to be ultimately how they manage them. And I think where that is true, so where you've got a product that is digital, then you probably do finesse a little bit more towards your 95%, towards 99%. You need to get those little differences, because actually your digital product is your product. But there aren't many of those organisations. Most companies sell stuff to people. Might be virtual stuff, might be physical stuff. In which case, you just need to acquire a customer. And you need to acquire the customer. You need to show them the product, get them to find it. And finding product is so difficult. And just allow them to find the product and then get it to them. And our job is to, the 80-20 rule, therefore, works beautifully. I think you and I were talking about, international rollouts. You can, and we've just mentioned one before. We were obsessing over an international language, but we hadn't. You couldn't even browse the site for 8 hours a day. So let's just do that first. If you can launch in 100 countries in English, why wouldn't you? So you don't need to go to the next level first. It's that sort of 80-20. And actually what you'll find is if you go to 100 countries very quickly, you'll find some of them you can't complete the transaction properly unless you put a language in or the right currency, and you'll learn that really quickly. But you don't learn if you're not there.
Yeah.
And that's where I think we're moving more and more, as you said, that sort of 80-20 rule where 80% of what I need is going to go with sort of 20% of the effort. And that last 20%, you only go there if your product is actually a digital product.
Yeah.
And I think in those cases, and some of the where you're effectively building a network business, or where you have a digital platform as your organisation, then yes, I think you probably do finesse a little bit more.
Agreed. And also to build on your point as well around technology, is it a differentiator nowadays? I have this conversation up front with prospects and leads very early on, actually, as a litmus test to see how are we going to get on? How, are we going to be able to work together here? Because when you get a brand come to you and you go, we just so different, we're unique, we need our own platform, we need our own systems, whatever it might be, that's when I start going, no, hold on. Your technology is not your differentiator. The technology is now a commodity off-the-shelf proposition you can put in place. It's your product, as you said. Like you said it actually really well. We haven't talked about this previously, so you said it really well. Which is, it's your product, it's your brand, and it's your customer service. It's the way you interact with your customer all around. That's how you're going to differentiate at least from a retail perspective. Not necessarily the underlying platform, because all the platforms will do somewhat similar amount and good enough. So that's a bit where you're going to be. You're going to separate yourself from the competition.
And e-commerce in particular, the off-the-shelf platforms now are really good, really good. And you what we used to do. In fact, you and I probably both did this. So you'd look around and you look at people like ASOS who were spending millions on product development, and you'd look at their UX and you'd say, we'll have a bit of that. So you just copy. Yeah. Why would you copy when you can literally have the best of that is now out of a box?
Yeah.
And there are one or two things that you might want to finesse in the page layout and in the structure of your flow, or in the your user journey, but those things are still possible within those platforms. It's not,
and you still have that flexibility.
Yeah, so. and also one of the greatest challenges in e-commerce retail is attribution. People don't attribute their products because it's a massive overhead, and they have lots of different products, and in particular in certain multi-category industries, the attribution can be really poor. That's where you should be spending your time. That will differentiate you far more than the platform you choose, and that's where things like AI and niche uses of machine learning can be really powerful as well, because fundamentally you've still got to find the product and you've got to put it in a basket and you've got to make a transaction. And those, in e-commerce specifically, there really isn't a lot of just reason for building your own. And the only thing I could possibly think of that would be an exception to that is if you were building a platform because you were going to sell the platform.
Yes, exactly.
In which case, and then you need to, but that's not really the e-commerce that we're talking about, is it? In most organisations, there is still this idea that specialist teams will innovate and other people will do BAU, and at some point the innovation drops into BAU, and then they have to onboard it and take it on, and most of the best innovation comes from people saying, I don't want to do this anymore. This, in fact, some of the worst innovation comes from when you say, how can you make your process more efficient? And you think, well, why are you doing that? Why have that? The challenge with asking senior leadership sometimes is, how do you drive innovation through your team, not across the business, is that you then sort of say, how do you make your team better? Not why does your team exist? And that should be the basis of all innovation. Really, is I've always had a sort of philosophy, which is my job as a CTO, as a tech person, is to put myself out of a job. And by that, what I mean is, if you go in and learn something to become a specialist in it, what you should then do is work out how you can do that in such an efficient way, either by training other people to do it or by automating it so that nobody needs to actually do it. Or you integrate it so it becomes a hidden process. So it still exists as a process, but it's no longer a manual process. It doesn't have people involved in it. So your job, therefore, as a technician, as an owner of technology and digital experience, is to create an environment where you say, here's something we used to do manually. I've now got other people doing it, but actually it's on the top of an automated process, or I've automated it completely and nobody needs to touch it. Your job is to put yourself out of a job. And if you can get others to think like that, i.e., why are we doing this? What? That is where real innovation comes from. It comes from when people say, and sometimes this is the best place to go, is right to the bottom, where you ask people at the coalface why they're doing what they're doing, and they say to you, I don't know, or, and I wish I couldn't, or I wish I didn't have to. And if I cut and paste this information from here to here, because if I don't, then the invoices aren't accurate. Right, okay, so that feels like there's no integration. So why don't we just do... And that's where you suddenly realise that innovation is not necessarily super clever. It's quite often something that's fairly obvious. It's just that the challenge is you're challenging the structure of the organisation, and you're also challenging the leadership. And it's, we all have egos, and we all like to feel like we own things. And one of the things you and I have both talked about is that sort of educating our colleagues across the board about, how you take a different approach to things. That idea of putting yourself out of a job is not that you don't have a job at all. It's that you are raising your game. You are becoming an expert at many things, because those things are happening regardless of you personally being involved with them. And at a low level in your career, that's you moving on, and at a high level in your career, that's you owning things and making things happen.
Yeah. I've always said that, if I've done my job right, I've got a high performing team that don't need me there day to day. Absolutely. So I put myself out of a job. And if I've done my job right, then the technologies, a lot of it's automated, it's running, it's stable, it's doing it, it's running the business. And I'm putting myself out of a job. So I completely agree on that. I really like your approach around the innovation is not what should we change? Like, it's actually why am I doing this? Yes. And then how should we change it? Rather than say, okay, well, what could we do better? Yes. I like that approach.
It's how we got to things like the different delivery options and the different return options. It wasn't because people just said, how do we do returns faster? We haven't ended up with faster returns. We've just ended up with different return options, because most people don't care how long it takes to get their money back, as long as they know they're going to get it. They just want to be kept informed. So all those options for returns and deliveries they haven't sped anything up per se, but what they have done is given people value and options. And at the same time, they've become much more automated, so there's a lot less people involved in doing things, a lot less error, so customers get accurate information, so they know where stuff is, so they don't constantly badger where, and those are just very basic things. There are much more complex problems we can solve. And this again is, the challenge with innovation, and then you have to, of course, talk about AI, is the challenge with AI is that it fundamentally is either going to fix things that up until now only humans were able to solve. So the exception management in your organization was managed by some people. You had a fully integrated business, but exceptions were managed by people. Now we're saying we think AI can fix some of those holes. What's wrong with that? Now, the answer to that is, well, because we've created specialist skills to manage exceptions. So you're sort of taking that away. And the other is that, if you think about things like content and attribution and product descriptions in retail, they all take huge amounts of time. And actually, in many cases, they're not particularly accurate or descriptive, and certainly attribution. If and you and I are both cyclists, right? You try and buy a set of wheels on a website and sift through that level of attribution, the frustration is palpable.
Yeah.
And if you're buying beauty products or cosmetics or trousers, anything, the frustrations about normalized attribution are really, really acute. And it's because fundamentally those things at the moment are still done manually. And the challenge is that there's an expectation that those things are built on skill. Mm-hmm. And they're not really built on skill. They're built on a run book, of which most of the time it's not being followed. And these are perfect opportunities for AI to take control, probably in an assisted way to start with. But there's a really good opportunity for those things to really be revolutionized by automation.
Yeah. And I think also the discussions that we're having around AI and how we can help organizations with their AI strategy, it's not about how can AI just replace this whole thing or this whole area. It's actually a lot more piecemeal to that. It's like, this is our process, or this is the things that we need to do to have this outcome, as you say. And how can we automate that? How can we make it more cost efficient using AI? And then AI is used in certain parts of it rather than just replacing, whole swathes of processes or systems. And maybe that's true in some areas, but actually at the moment it's more about just replacing specific parts of the way that organizations are doing things.
And the danger when you think of innovation, you think, well, you need to be innovative. So what can we innovate? And you find something to innovate.
Yes.
That's usually a really good example of where you say, we tried AI and it didn't work, or we tried, we tried integration, didn't work. And well, that's because you tried to find an opportunity. It was finding a problem to a solution. Mm-hmm. Often the best way, and this talks back to, how to engage with your board as well, is often the best way of finding both opportunities and outcomes is to spend time with your board and ask them, what do they need to succeed personally and in their functional role as an exec board member? And by that, I don't mean what do you think you need from me? I mean, what do you need? And I'll give you an example. I was in an organisation recently, and the sales director, CRO, said, he needs data about what's going on in the business because it's really hard to know, right? But he also needs all of his people to be just focused on the customer. He doesn't want anybody ever entering data into the systems. That's not their job. So he wants salespeople to literally ooze data in what they do. He wants to capture data through their activity, but he doesn't want them to actually put data into a system. Okay? There's your innovation.
Yeah.
How can we make that happen? And so we went away and said, all right, we can't fix all of that, but if we record what they're saying when they're talking to customers and we automatically put that into the CRM system, would that help? He's like, well, absolutely, that would help. That would be like me talking to my watch, which is sort of what I said I wanted. But let's try that. That's a real world example of something that was going to make a difference to both him and his team. And yes, it was using AI. It actually something that's been around for a while. And then the difference was how it put that information into the system. But that was and suddenly you've got a really engaged board member who's super engaged in a process that he didn't think was possible, but he also didn't think technology was that relevant to him? Because he's just focused on acquiring customers and talking to them and, account managing. And he knew, as far as he was concerned, technology was just about gathering the data that he did his reporting on. And that was the bit that he was finding really difficult. So the innovation usually comes from asking the question, what's your vision and what's our direction and, where are we going and where are you going, rather than what's the process you've got and how do you want to improve it. That's usually a route to it. You're just going to achieve the same as everybody else. Yeah. And in the end, what you're going to do is just automate a process which may not need to exist in the first place.
Being a CTO, it's a very challenging role, very stressful role. How do you find that balance from your personal time and life with your work-life balance? How do you manage to do that?
So there's two things I've always found, and I've been a CTO for quite a long time now, and it can be very lonely. I think one of the best ways to manage that is maintaining a network. You and I have, we've had some times when we haven't spoken for a while, but we've kept in touch, and I keep in touch with lots of people, lots of ad hoc conversations. That helps with that sort of intellectualizing challenges and problems. But also, I think from a personal perspective, I need to make sure I am unloading in the right way. And I've always used sport and exercise to help me sort of deal with stress, I think, and pressure. And I like to think that most of the time these days, I'm not stressed, but I am pressured. And I think you need to keep sort of active, and you need to keep your heart rate up, and you need to feel like you've got the energy to do the job. And so I balance what I do, in my personal life, which is, you and I both been cyclists for a long time. I still ride my bike a lot. I'm very active. I've got a lovely active family. When my kids were younger, we used to do a lot outside of work, and I used to prioritise my time at weekends. Not every weekend, but that balance of making sure there's some sort of line between what you do and who you are. And I'm still partly defined as a CTO, but I'm also a father and a husband, and and I need to make sure I'm doing those things too. So that's those things are really important.
Yeah. So important, isn't it? That high level technology leadership level, stressful roles to ensure you've always got that balance. And as you're talking through it, it reminds me we must organise that ride together. I'm not quite sure if I'm going to keep up with you, but we'll give it a go. I've seen you on Strava recently, so I need to make sure I improve my game. But huge thanks, John, for joining me today on the Frustrations of a CTO episode. Hope you've enjoyed it with those that have watched and listened to it. Please like the video on LinkedIn. Hit the subscribe button if you're watching it on YouTube. And we look forward to having you on the next episode of Frustrations of a CTO.
Frustrations of a CTO.